Hello and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with Jeffrey Poole and Joe Lalo, and we have a great guest for you guys here today, Rachel Caine. I'm going to go ahead and read her bio off of Amazon before we let her talk, and this is the part I usually mangle, so sorry in advance, Rachel. Okay, Rachel is the #1 internationally best-selling author of more than 45 novels, including the best-selling Morganville Vampires series, the Weather Warden series, the Outcast season series, Revivalist series, and the acclaimed YA novel Prince of Shadows. Her newest, most ambitious series yet, The Great Library, recently launched with the first book, Ink and Bone. She was born at White Sands Missile Range, which people who know her says explains a lot. She's been an accountant, a professional musician, and an insurance investigator, and until very recently continued to carry on a secret identity in the corporate world. She and her husband, fantasy artist R. Cat Conrad, live in Texas. Hi, Rachel. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, that's more or less a correct bio. I'm shocked. I forgot to update it. So
Yeah, mine's usually like 3 years old, and I haven't been publishing that long, so that's kind of sad.
Marketing 101, always update your bios, and I never do. There you go.
Yeah. I have to ask though, because I've been to White Sands Missile Range, and all I remember is the sand. Is there actually like a hospital there, or were you just back on a dune you were born? Or...
Well, it actually has a hospital seal on it, so I assume there is one back there in the dunes somewhere. But I've never been there. Well, obviously I was there, but not that I remember. But I think the dune story actually makes a more interesting origin. So let's go with that.
Yeah, your parents were traveling through and just decided to have a child.
My mother actually was one of the assistants for the scientists there, like Werner von Braun. And my dad did missile countdowns, so I have a colorful story already. It's a superhero story right there.
You were it was a foregone conclusion that you were going to write science fiction and fantasy.
I think so.
All right. Well, could you start out telling us how you got started with writing and what drew you to fantasy?
I really started reading fantasy and science fiction at a very young age, probably maybe 10. I guess, and because when I was young, there was no such thing really as a lot of juvenile science fiction. There was oh gosh, but they were all under the books for boys category in the library. So if you were a girl, you had to kind of sneak over there and grab them, and sometimes they wouldn't even let you have them when you took them out to check them out. But I loved science fiction and fantasy, and it really freed my mind. And when I first started writing, the very first thing that I sat down to write was essentially kind of an early precursor to Harry Potter, because I did it as a class assignment, and it was an Old West setting with two wizards who were dueling with wands in the middle of the street, and in one of those Old West gunfight scenarios. And my teachers all thought I was a little weird, which I think is still the case, actually.
All right. Well, now at least you can show them all your published books and say, I wasn't weird. I was just early.
I was just working on it. I as far as professionally, I started. I guess I published my first short story in about 1990. I had a long period where I was really too shy to show anyone anything or to do anything with it. I really didn't feel like I was there. So by the time I got out there to start showing it to people was about 1990, 1991, and I started making sales pretty quickly. So I think my first short story was 1990, my first novel was 1991, and it's just kind of been going on from there. The high point was like maybe 5 books coming out in 1 year, but usually it's more like 2 or 3.
Yeah, I didn't even think they let you publish that often if you were going the traditional route.
Well, they will if you're doing it in different areas, because I don't do it all. I did 2 usually a year, well, actually 1 a year in urban fantasy, and then I was doing 2 a year in young adult. And then I was also writing in romantic suspense and paranormal, so kind of spreading around quite a bit.
Okay. Do you want to tell us kind of how you got your first book deal back then? Did you have to go through an agent or did you just kind of submit to the publishers?
I am so atypical. It's such a bad story because I don't want anybody to think this is normal. Um, yeah, like I said, I was really shy and I didn't know how to go about any of it. This was pre-internet, and I did all the research I could, but I was very convinced it would never work. And I actually had a friend who bought me a ticket to a writers' conference and lied to me. He actually drove me to the writers' conference, dumped me off at the door, and left me. And so that was how I got my first experience of being around writers, and it was great. And I met my first editor there at that conference. 3 weeks later, he read something I'd submitted and bought the book, and that was kind of how I got started. Not, do not try that at home. That's not a great way to start.
All right. Well, at least you didn't corner him in the bathroom or stalls or something. I've heard stories from, if you look online, agents' blogs.
I've seen it happen, actually. I've seen the old, I'm going to leave my manuscript outside your bathroom door trick, and it's
You have
just
to,
really appalling.
you have to trip over it on the way out. You can't miss it.
Exactly. Of course, maybe they do trip over it, and then you have a lawsuit on your hands.
All right. I'm kind of curious. I remember, I read tons of fantasies in the 90s, and I'm trying to remember. I don't think urban fantasy and paranormal romance were quite as big then. I remember a lot of secondary world, epic fantasy, that kind of stuff on the shelves.
Sure.
So, I guess what are your thoughts on like the how the genre has come along and maybe where it is today?
I didn't start out writing. I write a lot of different things, and my attention jumps a lot. So I was a big fan also of horror fiction. So that's really where I started, was in horror fiction, although it was still urban fantasy in that it was set in modern day, in real life settings, but it had paranormal elements. And in that sense, but they had no other place to put it then except in horror. And so all of the covers were, red and black and had, vampires doing this. And I have some absolutely classic ugly covers. They're just amazing. But I think as I haven't changed what I was writing so much as the genres kept drifting. And sooner or later, your lane appears and you swim forward. And that happened to be urban fantasy for me. And then young adults. But I think the lanes continue to drift. Urban fantasy is kind of not, is not the ascendant thing right now. And also, I think epic fantasy has actually had a huge upswing, and then it's kind of got a fairly sharp downswing, it seems like. We always see these ups and downs in publishing. That's not new at all. And with the rise of self-publishing, with the rise of a lot of small press houses, I don't know that that's really a downside anymore like it used to be. Because when you could only do traditional publishing, if you were off target even by a little bit, you just weren't getting anywhere. And or if your genre had a falling off, everybody got thrown to the curb and you started over. Had that happened twice, 3 times, I think. That's why I have so many pen names.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny to me that the publishers they seem to say like, "Oh, this is dead this year," and I'll look at the bestseller list on Amazon
Right.
and they're just still selling like crazy. So
Sure.
I don't know what they're thinking sometimes.
Well, and sometimes it's a matter of scale too, because if you look at, I look at the things that are selling, and maybe on Amazon they're selling really well, but usually it's ebook, and ebook doesn't have the same challenges as trying to ship a physical product to a vast country like America. So you have to have a higher bar of profitability. And that's something I think people forget about, because even when I look at, I hit a lot of really great lists in the UK, but you look at the numbers and they're much smaller because the smaller country, they can do heavier, bigger, more elaborate volumes because they're shipping at such a small distance. And here we're shipping it, 3,000 miles. So I think we have to sort of adjust our thinking sometimes about where profitability is for, especially for traditional publishers, versus someplace like Amazon or an ebook publisher, because Amazon controls that shipping channel so completely.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And it's funny with self-publishing, if you sell 10,000 copies of an ebook and you're keeping 70% of the profits, you're making really good money for a book. But yeah, I can see where traditional publishers are like, oh, that's a fail, you know.
Exactly. You know, and it used to be, even for science fiction, uh, 15,000 copies was mid-list. And now I think 10,000 copies in a lot of cases, if you have a kind of a good timing, you can actually hit a list. It's very odd the way that the genres and the lists and everything have shaken out. So
Yeah, you just have to do pre-orders and get all 10,000 of those copies sold in 1 week.
yeah, that's the other problem, is it's such a limited window that you've got to get into.
All right, we're going to ask you about your Kickstarter a little later, but I was curious what led you to self-publish the latest book in your Weather Warden series and try the Kickstarter route.
Well, you know, it's one of those things where I kept getting a lot of mail asking if I was going to do more Weather Warden books. And the answer was no, because really there really wasn't a market for it in the traditional publishing sense. And I had a lot of other things going on, so it wasn't, you know, like top of my plate. But I kept thinking about it, and I thought, you know, I have been away from it a long time now. I think my last one was in 2009. So I really felt like I really wanted to revisit those characters, and it seemed like a fun way to do it. And when I talked to my publisher, they said, yeah, you're fine to do that. So it was an opportunity and inspiration sort of coinciding for once.
Oops, as I mute myself.
Oh, no.
No, that's great though. And did they actually flat out say like, you know, like sales are not good enough, we're not interested in publishing more in this series?
Well, you know, not in so many words. I mean, I don't think they ever really say that, but, you know, I think that the message was pretty clear that urban fantasy as a genre wasn't selling in the numbers that it had. And so they were like, well, we'll look at it, but, you know, but they also said, but you're free to go and do something yourself with this if you want to. So that seemed like a really fun opportunity to me to be able to explore how that worked and what I could do with it.
Awesome. Well, I know you haven't released it yet, but I think you'll find that those people who have like an established series and are able to get the rights and self-publish it, you know, I think you'll do really well.
I think it'll be fun. You know, it's an interesting experiment anyway, and I just thought it would be great because I got to work with Dave Seeley to do the cover, and Dave did the cover of the first 3 Weather Warden books. And I knew him from various conventions, so it was an easy thing to contact him and say, hey, Dave, you want to do another cover for me? And he immediately said, sure. And he was very generous. He even gave me the rights to do those little prints for the Kickstarter fulfillment, too.
All right, cool. Well, let me hand it to the guys. They have a few questions before we jump into the marketing stuff later on.
Sure.
Yep. My first question here is: you mentioned international best-selling in your bio. You've got internationally best-selling author, and you mentioned the UK. What countries do you do well in?
I have done really well in the UK, Australia also. I've done surprisingly well in the Czech Republic, Turkey. I did pretty well in Spain and France and Germany as well, and Sweden. Sweden's now, I think, almost caught up on my young adult series now.
Impressive. So it's sort of interesting to me how it seems like different countries have different tastes when it comes to genre.
They do, and it's a very odd thing. It's not even a genre, because sometimes it's even authors. I remember before I went over to the UK, I was talking to a couple of other young adult authors who wrote fairly similar kind of things, and they were saying, well, you know, I did a tour, but it didn't, you know, I didn't really draw the kind of numbers that I wanted to draw, and I was a little disappointed. And then I got over there, and the first thing I went to, I walked into a mall setting, I think it was, and And I went to go get a coffee, and I came out, and the line was just wrapping around this entire floor. And I thought, this cannot be right. And it just so happened that there's something about it that hit that sensibility just right. I don't know why that is, but I'm happy to have it for sure.
Sometimes you don't ask questions, you just smile.
Exactly.
So I noticed a couple of non-English markets in there. You do much translation, and like, is that your decision or the publisher's decision?
Well, we reserve the rights. We reserve all the foreign sales rights, and then we resell them to those markets individually. So that's part of what my agent does. And they're all translated editions. So when you're talking about Czech Republic, it's been translated. Obviously, UK and Australia.
No need.
I guess they translated into the proper spelling of,
Color.
color.
Yeah.
But generally they don't change a whole lot. And the interesting thing a lot of people don't realize is that those markets can be really profitable. It got to the point with, especially with my young adult series, that about half of the money I was making was coming off of foreign sales, which is pretty impressive, considering. Because when I first got started in this business, people told me foreign sales weren't going to make me any money. And it really depends. It depends on if you've hit something that really translates well into those other territories.
Yeah, and you never know. You never know. Again, like what's going to catch on. We've mentioned in the past I did reasonably well in Germany recently, and that was sort of inexplicable. And it's the whole David Hasselhoff thing.
I'm always amazed. I kept thinking, why are my vampire books selling so well in Romania? I mean, you'd think that they would have enough of that.
Yeah.
But no, I did really well there. So.
That's excellent. All right, so you, like many successful authors we've spoken to and read about, have had a very varied assortment of jobs. Do you feel they contributed to your literary career in any way?
I think every job I had contributed because they taught me something, even if it appeared to be completely unrelated at the time. Because one of the things I learned, just for example, from insurance investigation, my job it was kind of a horrible job, really. I had to tail people, and I had to photograph them, and I had to watch them for any kind of telltale giveaways that they were, scamming people. And I found that really unpleasant to do, but it taught me how to watch people in a whole new way and to get details out of watching them. So I guess in that sense it really was kind of training, writer training.
Absolutely.
And the same thing, I worked as an office manager. I learned to run giant technology projects, which helps me, organize marketing campaigns. I can now do my own video. I can do my own video editing. I can do my own graphic design because I've worked in those fields. There's a lot of things that really ended up helping me.
Yeah, it seems like people sort of forget the value of the resume. It's not just getting you a job, but it's also all the skills you've accumulated.
Exactly, and just being able to do public speaking is a huge, valuable thing for writers because more and more we're required to do that. And when you get out in public in front of a crowd, you better be able to be entertaining. And if you haven't done that in your personal life, which most people haven't, a job is somewhere where you might learn that kind of skill and get paid for it.
Yeah, and also there's something to be said about just those little details about jobs and careers that you pick up, which then when you mention them in a book, somebody who also has the job is like, that's true, and like they point to the page.
Absolutely. I was a professional musician, so I love to write little details about musicians and music and performances because I think that's really fun. I've seen all the backstage crazy stuff that goes on.
Yeah, again, it's all material. All right, just one more question before I hand you off again. I always talk about covers. You mentioned covers. When you're in the hands of a publisher, how much influence do you have over the cover of your books?
I'm very fortunate because I have written in my contracts generally, I have cover consultation. Most people think cover control is best, but you have to remember, authors are in their heads, and we're not really trained in visual communication. So unless we have been, sometimes I have seen really disastrous things come out of authors having control of a cover. So I tend to back off and let them do their thing. If I see something that I really don't like for some particular reason, then I can argue it. And a good example of this, which, by the way, I didn't end up winning because for various reasons, there was a cover for a book called Kiss of Death in the Morganville Vampires series, and it was a beautiful cover. It was gray, and the character had this striking hot pink hair, and I called up my editor and said, the character doesn't have pink hair, right? She said, yeah, but we really love it. And I said, I love it too, but young adult readers are very literal. So I thought about this, and I was not done writing the book yet. So I actually put in the last chapter, she goes to Spencer's and she buys a pink wig. And now I'm covered no matter what happens. But you can't always win those fights, but you can argue the point. It's undercover consultation if there's something you feel strongly about. But I've been very fortunate. I mean, most of my Rachel Caine books have been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, your lineup on Amazon is excellent.
It's really striking.
Yeah, indeed. It's funny because you talk about how a consultation is best, and it makes sense. I literally, on the first professionally made cover I did, I learned that what I asked for was terrible, and he informed me of such. And he's like, "Here's what you actually want," and piece by piece, the entire thing was changed. So, I don't think I would need control, just consultation.
I think it's very humbling when you realize how much you don't know. I mean, they can obviously be wrong about something. Everybody's wrong about something, but just the fact that most authors don't understand type design. That the point of type design is to make your type not only stand out, but also be readable at various sizes. You got to read it in the thumbnail, and it has to stand out on the shelf, and it has to look stylistically interesting, but not, fake. There's a lot of skill that goes into something as simple as type design. And kerning, the space between the letters and the lines and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's the reason there's an entire industry built around it. All right, so that concludes the questions I've got, so I'm going to hand you off to Jeff for a few more.
Okay, thanks.
Alrighty. Okay, you've written quite a few urban fantasy novels and obviously are doing quite well with them. What do you feel constitutes a well-written urban fantasy? I mean, are there certain elements that you feel readers expect to be there?
They'd be really disappointed if they didn't have some paranormal element that was very strong. That's kind of a given. But it's really varied. I've read things that are more on the horror side of the spectrum, things that are more on the comedic side, mixes of the two. I've read some that are sexy. I've read some that are more, almost more to the chick lit side, but they're all really under the same umbrella. The nice thing is it's a very, I would say, not only varied but very vibrant spectrum. And it's easy when you start looking at covers because, the thought behind a genre is you want to package them very similarly so that people can immediately identify, oh, that's like the book I like. But the problem with that is when you get a lot of them together, it all begins to look the same. So I think urban fantasy in particular, because it got so big so fast, fell prey to that, oh, they're all the same thought, because you look at a lot of the covers and it's got, woman in leather with a knife and a tattoo. and they're not, you can pick up any two of these books and they're going to be really completely different. But, I don't hear the same complaint about science fiction, and look, there's two books with spaceships on the cover. I think as far as things that readers expect, really it's much more open than, let's say, paranormal romance, in which I think they really expect a heavy romance component, and they also expect generally either a happily ever after or a happily for now. you don't have any of that really in urban fantasy. You probably are going to have some kind of romance in it, but not even necessarily a lot. And you might have none at all. I've read several that had none at all. So it's a much more open genre than people think.
Are there any common mistakes that you've seen in your genre that you feel that could have been avoided?
Well, there's always the trap of, I think, trying to be someone else's book. Because a lot of people got inspired because they read something in the urban fantasy genre that fired their imagination, but then they rewrote that book. And that can be not only damaging ultimately to the writer, but also to the genre when people do start feeling like everything is derivative of everything else. But that's really, I can't think of anything consistently that I would criticize. I really love reading them, and they're a lot of fun. And they do really long series, which I love. You can read 10 books in a series, so I can binge. It's like binge watching Netflix, really, only with books.
Seriously. It really is. Okay, would you recommend to our listeners, and because we've heard it both ways here, but would you recommend to our listeners that you should write the stories you want to tell, or should you look at what's essentially selling and make a determination only after you've done a lot of research?
It depends on, well, first it depends on what your plans are, because if you really want to just tell your stories, obviously follow that muse. If you are looking to sell something that's going to make you money, and there are people who do that. It's commerce, not necessarily art. There are people who are in it for, as a business. If that's your goal, then yeah, study the market, find out what's selling, but also choose your delivery method, because traditional publishing, generally, you're looking at the light from a distant star. It's a year, 2 years in the past when they bought that book, sometimes more than that. And so they're no longer looking for that. However, if you're looking at what's coming out self-pub that's doing well, that's a very quick turn. You can do that book, you can have it out in a very quick turnaround time. I'm not a proponent of, writing for cash. I think it's much better, and people respond much more enthusiastically when you write something you are enthusiastic about. But I understand people got to eat, so both you can find a happy medium though.
Okay, before I pass you over to Lindsay, I've got one quick question for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the covers with the red hair that really stood out on the one cover there. Is that the character that's on your windowsill back there?
Yeah. Well, what's funny is that particular doll was handmade by a bookseller in the UK, and she's the other character in the books who is kind of the goth girl named Eve. And she does not have pink hair either, but she regularly puts streaks in her hair, so you'll see that little pink streaks. But yeah, that was so odd because the main character that they were basing the cover photo on was actually a girl who just has brown hair, and she'd never had any other colored hair until that book.
Yeah, that makes you go, should I change it or should I say something? It's a really pretty cover. Choices. But okay,
Thanks.
let me pass you over to Lindsay, and she's got some marketing questions for you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, yes, we like to get into how to sell books here on the show also, or in this case, how to do well in a Kickstarter campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Just to sum up for the audience, you decided to do a Kickstarter to fund the self-publishing of the new book. And it looks like you asked for 5,000 people, and you ended up getting people pledging for over 18,000.
Yeah.
So what happened? Do you have a mailing list? How did you get out to everybody?
Well, I had a little bit of an advantage. Obviously, it's an established series, but yeah, I told my mailing list about it. My mailing list is I think it's about 20,000 people that I've accumulated over the years. But you figure you're going to convert maybe 10% of that generally to action. We had also run a previous Kickstarter the year before to fund the Morganville web series. So a lot of those people were following me because they'd gotten involved in that, and a lot of them actually crossed over to help with this too, even though they may not have been, originally fans of that particular book series, which is really cool. The other thing is I had a lot of support from other authors who really helped me out and retweeted the messages, and that was really lovely. But it was just such an enthusiastic response, and it surprised the heck out of me. We've made the goal in under 24 hours. We were at, over twice the goal, and, I think by the end of the day, it was crazy. And so we kept adding stuff. I get very enthusiastic. This is a problem when you're running Kickstarter. You get enthusiastic because you're doing so well and people are sending such wonderful messages, and you think, I want to give you more. I want to give you more. Well, let me tell you, it is good because you want to give them more, but try to give them more that doesn't cost you shipping. It's an important life lesson because shipping is expensive. And if you want to keep that money to go to the production of your product, you have to really have an absolute grasp of what that shipping is going to cost you. And because I had a lot of international backers, about 35% of that particular Kickstarter was international backers. And 35% of my shipping was going to be at international rates. And it's not media mail because, spoiler, if you put in a package that doesn't bend, it's not media mail. It is actually package rate, which is higher. So I had put a do not bend sticker on because it was an art print, and I'd put it in a little holder, and I actually had the stiff cardboard mailers. And even though it was the size requirement and the weight requirement to go media mail, it couldn't go media mail. That was a new thing I learned.
Yeah, I've had that experience where you can't even do international media mail anymore. So I had a contest to give away recently and sent 5 books to South Africa, and it was like $60 in shipping.
Yeah, you can go. It'll go really fast. I did discover that using the internet-based stamps.com, you can actually do a lot discounted international mail.
Oh, I'm going to have to look into that for sure.
Yeah, because you can get your own scale and everything. It's pretty sweet.
Okay, I have to ask, because 20,000 people is not you don't sneeze at that mailing list. That's a really good mailing list. How did you, because I know when you're traditionally published, you can't say, like in the back of the book, hey, come to my website and sign up for my mailing list. So how did you accumulate all those people?
Well, what you can do is put your website on your bio in your book, and then in your website you can have the mailing list. So you can put it front and center. You can drive people to it. But that's all I really did. And I also ran some drives where we would have people. We would run contests for things if they would sign up for the mailing list, because you can do that through MailChimp, which is really a great service. So when you run a contest through, oh gosh, I'm gonna blank now. There's a couple of different ones, but I know we want to use one a lot. But it's connected to MailChimp. So when people sign up for the contest, then they also Rafflecopter. Yes, thank you. Rafflecopter. So when they sign up through Rafflecopter, it also feeds my mailing list.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you've been very proactive and not just kind of relied on the publishers to do the marketing for you. So that's really cool.
I do a lot of things myself, and sometimes I'm sure that there's a lot of wailing and they wish I wouldn't sometimes. But I do my own bookmarks. I do my own. I've done my own buttons. I did these. I don't know if you can see this, but these lenticular bookmarks that actually change images. That was for Prince of Shadows, which was my young adult book. And I was doing these for Morganville, and these were very special edition things you could only get at my signings. So it drove people to the bookstore signings as well. and you would get them at conventions like Romantic Times or San Diego Comic Con or something like that. But I'm a great believer in things that are too expensive to throw away.
Sounds good. Is there any service? Got a dog shaking off. Is there any service that you would recommend that you use to do the merchandise kind of stuff?
There's a lot of great services out now for things that are more modestly priced. Like, if you want to just do drop bookmarks that are not expensive, you can get those through. Gosh, I have a whole list. I could give you, but there's a place called clubflyers.com. There's Vistaprint. I know there is at least one or two more that are kind of in that same vein that have a giant list of pre-sized things that you can do, and you just upload your design. And it's actually quite cheap. Oh, I don't have an example here, but another great one I discovered this year, and I'm addicted to it, is makeplayingcards.com. Because you can make tarot-sized cards, you can make regular deck-sized cards, you can make little mini cards, you can make like Pokemon cards, but you can upload your designs and do custom-made cards. And I do character cards for Ink and Bone for the Great Library that come in a pack, so you can actually fan them out and you can look at all the characters and read all of their details and everything, which is really fun.
Yeah, I actually had it down in my questions to ask you about that because I saw that on your Kickstarter bonus rewards. I was like, wow, this is really cool. How do I get that from my characters?
It's simple. I think it's called makeplayingcards.com, and they're surprisingly affordable. I was actually really pleased to find them because and they look so cool.
All right, I'm taking notes here while my dog drinks in the other room and makes noisy licking sounds. This is a professional podcast, just in case you weren't sure. But going back to Kickstarter, is there anything else that you learned from the process that you would recommend if somebody is thinking, because I know a lot of people, especially if they're self-publishing and they're starting on a shoestring, they're hoping maybe I can get $1,000 to pay for the editing and the cover art.
Of course.
They probably don't have 8 books out in a series yet and a fan base built up, but is there anything you learned that you could, I don't know, give them some advice?
Well, one of the most key things a lot of people skip is support other people's projects, because that helps you make a network of people who also will help support your project later on. I mean, this has happened many times. When I've seen somebody's project I thought was interesting, I will jump in and give them a boost monetarily and also with retweeting and stuff. But I get it back. They then share information with their followers and their people, and so build a community of people, because that's really important in this day and age. The other thing is, free things are not valueless. Especially if the thing that you want to give people is the story. Well, you can write short stories. You can give them, special excerpts. You can do, audio readings of stories. You can do all kinds of things that are not expensive to do, but can be very personal and something that only the backers can get. And I think that's also a great reward.
And you don't have to pay for shipping.
Yes.
No, I did Kickstarter a few years ago too to fund an audiobook, and I had the same experience where international shipping especially was much more than I was expecting it to be. So yeah, you want to make sure and factor that into how much you ask for.
Yeah, and the Morganville series campaign was super successful. We raised, over, let's see, I think it was almost $72,000 for that. And then, but the problem is, I had gotten really enthusiastic, and one of the things people loved so much were these bunny slippers. I shipped out probably pretty close to 350 pairs of bunny slippers, of which half of them went internationally. And And the bunny slippers might have only cost me $7, but the shipping was usually in the range of 20 to 30 per pair. So yeah, you have to really look at the cost benefit of what you're going to offer.
Yeah, I don't think you can media mail bunny slippers either.
They're gigantic. They're like snowshoes. No way.
All right, one last question for me. I guess what I hear today from a lot of people is that when you sign with a traditional publisher, they're not necessarily going to put any money into marketing you. I mean, maybe if you get lucky, they will, but it seems like authors are expected to do a lot on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's true, and has that changed over the years? Did they used to do more, or what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think that it's changed at all. I mean, when I got
Same.
into it, it was sink or swim, and I think it's sink or swim now, generally. I mean, I don't think they do nothing. That's not what I mean at all. But they have their specific marketing that deals with putting the book into places people will see it and places people will buy it. There's a difference between marketing to an end consumer and B2B marketing, and they're doing B2B marketing generally. Where they're interfacing with customers is going to be the big shows like San Diego Comic-Con or Worldcon or World Fantasy. But generally, you're not going to get a lot of media attention. You're not going to get a lot of, direct consumer outreach. If you want to do that yourself, then that's on you. But that's what social media is so great about too, is that social media allows you to do much more direct touch points than we've ever had before as authors, which is pretty great.
Awesome. And do you think for someone who is hoping to get a traditional deal now, do they need to build up a platform, social media and blog and all that stuff ahead of time, or do you think that people are still able to sell the book without having a presence out there?
I don't think it matters. I mean, I think it helps if your book is pretty good and maybe, they're looking at decision-making factors as to whether this one is better than that one. But if they love the book, then that will come. They're confident that if they love the book, they can get it in the hands of readers. That platform is going to pretty much build itself on the strength of the work. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try to do that. I think you should, but should you put all your time into it? I wouldn't say so.
All right. So in the end, you hope that the werewolf novel you have is what they're looking for this year.
I think werewolves are always green. I think we're good.
All right. I'm going to hand you to Joe to ask a few more questions on the marketing side.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So for your upcoming book, you've got a release date in July, and that's a pretty long pre-order, longer than most people are allowed to have.
Mm-hmm.
First off, what made you decide on a long pre-order?
I don't. That is really the publisher that does that. And honestly, it's not that unusual for me because I have had pre-orders pop up before I ever turn the book in.
Well, you see, that would make me nervous.
It makes me terrified. But it happens. I've had this happen pretty often because my turns on some of the stuff are really quick. When I was doing the young adult books every 6 months, usually that pre-order would already be out. When the prior book came out, they would put the pre-order up the next month. And usually I was maybe in draft 1.
That's nerve-wracking.
The hard thing about something being out for pre-order for that long, I think, is to sustain any kind of momentum. And that's why I look at what works and what doesn't, and I have a pretty good grasp of that, but I'm always learning. And one of the things that's kind of a tenet of advertising is the more people see something, the more that they associate it with success, right? But there's also a backlash effect where if they see it and they're annoyed by it, they start tuning it out. So there's a very delicate balance there, and I don't know that I've been able to figure that out yet, but I'm working on it. For this one though, we're actually marketing a lot to schools and libraries because the theme of the series is the Great Library of Alexandria. There's a lot of interesting stuff about, history and science and libraries, and I've got evil librarians, and the librarians love that.
Well, yeah.
Oh, look, marketing. I'm showing the cover. Is it backwards? It's probably backwards.
No. It's forwards for us. It's backwards for
okay.
you.
but I do think the marketing piece of it is just always such a Rubik's cube.
No, yeah.
And I don't know that any of us actually have the golden key to unlock it yet.
Yeah, well, that's why this show exists, to keep searching for that key. All right, so continuing the earlier thread of marketing traditionally published stuff, how much flexibility have you found publishers are willing to give you in terms of promotional methods that maybe they had not heard of before? Like, for example, recently name-your-own-price promotions and multi-author bundles have been popular. Like, how would that sort of thing go over with a traditional publisher?
Probably not very well. I can tell you just from historical knowledge that one of the things you would think would be a decent tactic on pricing would be when a book comes out in a series, you drop the price of prior books, right?
Yeah.
Up until fairly recently, there was a lot of resistance to that idea. Just did not. That needle did not move very much. It started to, and we're getting bundle pricing now, and we're getting a lot of other things that I think are going to be very helpful. But as far as set your own price, I don't know. I think they're really a little bit leery of that.
Yeah, I can certainly see that, considering price is always a hot button for traditional publishers.
Well, and it's also a hot button for a lot of readers. I mean, I have people email me who say, "Gee, I'd buy your book, but it's more than 99 cents."
It's disheartening a little bit.
A little bit. I always try to tell them, well, there's libraries, you can go read it for free.
Yeah. All right. Last question, really. It looks like your books are fairly widely available. You actually mentioned marketing to schools, which is, I don't think I've heard anyone on this show yet mention specifically marketing to schools.
It's an important component of YA because there's really no way to market. It's actually legally a problem to market to minors.
Right.
You're not supposed to gather emails. You're not supposed to do a lot of those things, and so being able to reach those people, I do a lot of school visits. So I actually I volunteer to go to school classes and talk about my books. I go and do library visits in schools. I've actually got one of those actually next week. And then we also send out flyers and newsletters to a list of librarians and school districts and English teachers, but we spend a lot of time gathering that information. It's very difficult to put together in some states.
I can imagine.
But some it's easy and some it's not. But that for me that's been a real help. We actually I don't think I have it here, but we actually sent out little thumb drives that looked like books that had the name of the book on the front for Prince of Shadows, and we sent those out as special gifts to teachers and librarians that wrote in or just emailed us and asked for them. And they had on there a sample of the book, teacher guides, study guides, and the book trailer.
Cool. I guess the last little sort of add-on to the concept of being wide. Now that you're sort of dabbling in self-publishing, lots of people like to go exclusive with Amazon because there's some perks involved. And do you have any interest in that?
I'm always interested in listening, but you're kind of closing one door to open another in some sense, because looking at my numbers, and I do think this is important for writers to do. You should know what your numbers are. How much of your percentage of readers are reading ebook? How much are reading print? If you can find that out, then you also know if you do, let's say, an Amazon exclusive, that's never going to be in Barnes & Noble. Probably not. So how many of those readers are you cutting off? And it's hard to know that, but I know that for me, my numbers on young adult is an entirely different beast because mostly it's print. But that's at least like 70% print, whereas my urban fantasy is probably about 65% ebook. So, at some point there's a tipping point. It doesn't matter so much, but you really need to look at your statistics and know your market. And now we have tools to do that. You can look at your demographics on Amazon. There's other places you can find it. Traditional publishing is starting to open up author portals now, so you can look at your numbers and how they break out there. There's a lot before.
That makes a lot of sense. But like I said, finishes up my question, so Jeff's got the last set for you.
Okay, thanks.
Alrighty. With regards to this, new title of yours that you're self-publishing, are you planning on taking advantage of any marketing strategies that you might have learned about from watching your publisher traditionally publish your other titles?
It's a good question. I haven't really started planning that out yet, but I probably am going. Well, it's going to be mainly ebook with a print component. So it's going to be a little bit different mix than what they were doing, because they were really focusing, I think, print, and then ebook was sort of the adjunct in a lot of ways, at least when the series first started. So I think the marketing was quite different. It's quite difficult, I believe, to get Amazon placement. So I'm not really sure how that works unless you go like an Amazon exclusive. But I don't really know yet. I think my first goal is to fulfill the book to all my Kickstarter backers. That's kind of, to me, my core audience that was there from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, we can spin it out and see what works and what doesn't. And there's a lot of great info out there from self-publishing folks about online promotions. There's a lot of lists like BookBub and things like that that are great resources. And there's a lot of blog tours and things. I try to minimize my time I spend in that cycle, because obviously I also have a lot of other things going on. So I'm more at ways to promote the ebook through and the print book through less invasive methods that take a whole lot of time, like blog tours, because I've lost weeks that way.
That actually ties into my second question. Is there anything you've seen the traditional publishers do to help market like an ebook that you feel that you could probably do better from home? So like pretty much any of our listeners might be able to do.
Yeah, I don't really see a difference in the way they market ebook and print. I mean, they're marketing the package pretty much. What they do on the back end, I don't see, because if they're marketing to a channel that's B2B, I'm not getting that information necessarily. So there's negotiations that are going on with Amazon about placement, but I don't know what those are. I don't know that there's much that would be applicable to the way I would do it from the way they do it, because they have such an economy of scale to work with, and I've got one thing. So I think it's better for me as an author to go the direct-to-consumer route, where I know that I have strength because I can leverage my mailing list, I can leverage social media, pay for Google AdWords or different ads that I can put up, and I'm not shy about doing that. And I do it for my traditionally published books too. But I don't know that there's anything special I would do for the ebook.
All right. And I always like asking this question to the authors. Is there any advice you'd give a younger version of yourself should you ever be given the chance to do so?
Always. I think my biggest thing I learned was everybody fails. Everybody fails. It's not a thing where you get published and suddenly you are a success. It's a continuum, it's a process, there's ups and downs, you're going to fall on your face, you're going to get up again, And nobody really tells you that. Nobody tells you it's a career that you have to get through day by day by day. I had to change my name 3 times to get where I am, because literally my book sold in such abysmal numbers that I could not get the bookstores to even order them. So the only way to do that, to get around that, is just change your name and come in as, "Hi, I'm brand new. Aren't I exciting?" And and there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. But it requires you to have a much more flexible mindset than I came into this with. When I had to change my name the first time, I felt like I had failed in my quest, and I was going to go home in humiliation and cry in a corner. And now, when something goes wrong and something doesn't launch well, or I just know, okay, what can I do to do it better next time? What can I do to do better after the fact? There's always things you can do, but the important thing is there's going to be a tomorrow. There's going to be another shot at it.
So now I have to ask, how do you come up with a new name? Do you mix like the letters of the previous names and just kind of like jumble them up? Okay, let's see here. I could spell out Jean or Jane or Joan or...
I think everybody's got a different strategy, but mine. By the time I got to Rachel Caine, it was what's short, and what can I? I know I wanted to start it with the same initial as my real name, so that if I started signing it and I had a little brain fart, I would have a chance to still be.
I know where you're going with this.
Because the worst thing to me, it actually fries my brain, is when I'm at the store or I'm doing something and I'm signing a check and someone says, "Here, sign this form. Put your autograph right here," and then my brain locks because I don't know if it's my real name or my fake name. It's the worst. But yeah, that's right. So Rachel Caine, my actual name is Roxanne Conrad, so it's got the same initials, and therefore it's not too far off. But that's my only thing. Oh, although I will tell you this, there's also a marketing component, because at the time that I was picking names, we picked a whole variety of names, and my publisher came back and said, "Hey, maybe you should look at the concentration of names of people you might want to be shelved near."
That's an interesting aspect to consider.
You know who's in urban fantasy that's very close to Caine?
Who?
Ann Bishop and Jim Butcher.
Oh, there you go. I'm going to have to consider that one. They're like, let's see, you're looking at like a bunch of fantasy authors. Where can I could change my name and fit you right next to Piers Anthony, Terry Pritchard? Yeah, okay.
See?
But,
it's
yeah.
Your name can be a marketing tool, so remember that.
I will. All right, that's it for my questions. Let me hand you back to Lindsay, who can wrap things up.
Okay.
I would just have to make sure my signature was completely illegible for both versions so that no problems. I'm actually already there. It's not a big challenge. So.
I really try hard to have it be legible. It's not neat by any stretch, but it is. You can tell what it says. And I felt like I was a real success. I had to sign in a warehouse in the UK. I had to sign 5,000 books, and I signed them in 4 hours. And I felt like I was the king of the world. And they said, "Wow, you're the second fastest." And I said, "Who signed faster than that?" And they were like, "Oh, this guy who's a football star, but he's just doing loop line, loop line, loop line." So I guess my next signature is loop line.
All right. Yeah.
I'd be curious to know if your signature on book 1 looked anything like the signature on book 5,000. Because usually by that time your hand is killing you and it's more of a scribble.
It still looked mostly the same. I'm not saying it didn't get a little ragged, because I think it did.
All right. Well, to wrap things up, I guess I should ask you, what does the future hold? And are you going to stick with traditional publishing, or do you think you'll be a hybrid author going forward?
I'm certainly intrigued by the idea of hybrid, but I don't know. There's a certain aspect to it that kind of makes me nervous. I do like the control in theory. I think I got to just wrap my head around it because I've been traditional for so long. But I don't think I'll ever step away from traditional either because I really like a lot of the very professional things they do for me. Because I feel like I'm a partner with them. I don't feel like they're taking advantage of me. I feel like when the money that they're getting is actually paying for a service that I could not do as well myself. And I want it to be done as well as possible, obviously. So for me, I mean, I love this cover. I'm not going to design a cover this good. It's just never going to happen. But but I also I think I'll probably end up being a hybrid author. I think most of us will be at some level. And Patreon is an interesting idea, and Kickstarter is an interesting thing, and you know, there's just a ton of options that we really didn't have before, and as creative people, that's a huge strength. I want to keep traditional publishers in business too because they really do things that we are not going to be able to do as well on our own. So I want to have both channels.
Yeah, it sounds like why not? If you have the option to take advantage of both worlds, especially if the contracts are not like draconian, so that you are allowed to publish on the side.
Well, and you have to, you know, that's one thing you have to be vigilant about because it's a business. They're going to be businesslike, and you have to be businesslike as well. You've got to protect yourself. Your agent needs to be vigilant. You also need to be, and make sure that you're questioning things that don't look right and keeping current with what's going on in contract circles. And there's lots of good discussion forums where you can find out what the terms are that are kind of the new red flag issues.
Yeah, I've heard lately that they want world rights for whether they're planning to publish you everywhere or not.
Yeah, and world rights, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I made quite a bit of money off of foreign rights. I love foreign rights. So that's really hard for me to give up. I don't want to give up my film and television rights. I don't want to give up my audio rights. I mean, if the deal is theoretically good enough, but, you know, I would have to really crunch the numbers and see what I thought was the best thing. I just want to make sure people don't discount what those rights are worth. Because I think starting out, you don't have a good idea of what that is, and it's very easy to get yourself in too deep. And I know people who have, and you know, they regret it for years after.
All right. Well, thank you for all of the advice today. Where can people find you, and is there any particular book that you would like to direct listeners to?
Oh gosh, RachelCaine.com is an easy place to find me, and also Twitter at Rachel Caine. Facebook, there's a Rachel Caine fan page. I have so far resisted Instagram, but I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I'm just not a picture person. I don't know. And then as far as, I've got a ton of new things that have come out in the past 3 months. They're in the short fiction world, so you know, kind of look for those. They're going to be on the front page of my website, and then because those are all anthologies. I have an anthology that's coming out March 1st that's called Midnight Bites, which is a collection of Morganville Vampires short fiction in my YA series, and I'm actually doing a UK tour for that, and then July 1st, we have Paper and Fire, which is the second book of the Great Library. And then July also, we're going to have the launch, hopefully, of Red Hot Rain, which is the self-published Weather Warden book. That's kind of all I have right now.
Is that all? You're such a slacker.
Oh, and I'm in the new X-Files anthology.
Ooh, that's cool.
I'm ridiculously excited. Ridiculous.
No, I watched all those back in the day. That'd be fun. All right. Well, I will put your links on the show notes for this site and also the links to the services you mentioned for getting bookmarks and stuff. I thought that was pretty helpful for people.
Sure. I will email you a list also of some other things that I've found over the years because I keep it all in a spreadsheet. I'm something wrong with me. I like spreadsheets.
It sounds great. I wouldn't expect anything less from somebody with rocket scientists. What were your parents doing on that missile range? I forgot, but they sounded smart.
I think they are very smart people. So I am certainly no rocket scientist, however.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And this will be episode 64, everyone. So come on by the site and check out all the notes we're going to have on there for you. Thanks.
Right.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.